One of some historians' favorite topics on the Battle of Berlin is the story of the mass abuse of German women in May 1945. The topic first came to light in 1954 when former Nazi propagandist Kurt Marek published a book, The Women of Berlin. Based on the diaries of Nazi journalist Martha Hillers, who during the war years was engaged in agitation to join the Hitler Youth. The author of the book colorfully described how Soviet soldiers abused German women. Then there were memories of other eyewitnesses, and these memories, along with the diary of the Nazi woman, were duplicated in books and movies. In the context of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, the subject of violence in Berlin became a tangled tangle that became a tool of anti-Soviet propaganda. And even now, thanks to such memories, some people's perceptions of the Russians have not changed much. They still think that it was not a soldier, but a drunken Mongoloid who entered Berlin. He took away watches and bicycles, didn't know how to start a car, and ripped wallpaper off the walls of rooms, and in between he chased women. That 2 Soviet fronts entered Berlin, abused 1 million women, and quietly left. This primitive picture of the Soviet occupation, invented by Nazi survivors in Germany after the war, does a great job of soothing the battered German ego. The story of 1 million raped Berlin Germans allows them to forget the Holocaust, the gas ovens of Buchenwald, Babi Yar, Katyn, where millions of Soviet citizens died. Although Germany has undergone denazification and also preserves Soviet monuments, the stories of violence in Berlin have not changed in 60 years. But it wasn't quite as they say. As the front approached Germany's borders, the Soviet leadership became increasingly concerned about the need to change the morale of the Soviet armies and the possible wave of violence against civilians. Beginning in 1942, hatred of the German people was cultivated, where every German was considered a fascist. This began with Ilya Ehrenberg's famous newspaper text, "We realized, the Germans are not people. We will not speak out. We will not be outraged. We will kill. If you haven't killed at least 1 German in a day, your day is gone. If you've killed 1 German, kill another. There's nothing more fun than German corpses. Don't miss." But the strategy of hating Germans, created in the face of Soviet defeat in order to boost the morale of soldiers, became dangerous in 1945. Decisions had already been made about the division of Germany, and we were to build a common house with the surviving Germans. And Soviet soldiers could well get out of control and unleash terror in Berlin, as the Germans did in Minsk, Kiev, and besieged Leningrad. After all, as the USSR was liberated, the simple and cruel words "kill the German" were reinforced by the picture of German war crimes and news of the death of relatives. It is impossible to convey what the Soviet army saw in the liberated Soviet territory. Here is a routine SS report to the chief of the German police in Minsk on the results of the operation against partisans in one Belarusian district. Results: enemy losses, 327 killed, 227 captured, 182 executed. German losses, 11 killed, 32 wounded. Burned 87 villages. So when the Soviet army crossed the border with Germany, Stalin changed his propaganda strategy. Ehrenberg was scolded for cruelty, and commanders began telling soldiers that there were Nazis and there were Germans, and that the Germans could not be touched. The Soviet commanders and commissars did a Herculean job to save Germany from the fury of the soldiers. And in approaching and entering Berlin, Generals Zhukov and Konev issued several orders forbidding the eviction of Germans, searches, seizure of property, and occupation of their apartments, not to mention stricter penalties for violence against civilians. Courts and prosecutors were established. But to the enraged Soviet soldiers in Germany, the monsters remained monsters, and the Germans were all the same. They spoke German, they looked like Germans, German children shot soldiers in the backs. And perhaps, I emphasize perhaps, not all Red Army soldiers were able to follow orders not to touch Germans and Germans after 1,000 kilometers of scorched Soviet land. Nevertheless, what the Germans did in the Soviet Union did not happen in Berlin. Berlin did not become a grave pit like some cities in Russia. Orders worked or the Slavic heart worked, but the rare stories of disgraced Germans are not confirmed by anything but words. Not even 5,000 children were born in Berlin after the rape of 1,000,000. And there are no documents confirming that the girls had abortions. And not a single memoir, not even the diary of Nazi Hitler's, claims that this was a purposeful Russian revenge. But there are plenty of documents and other stories about how Soviet soldiers helped women and children and shared food with Berlin. How love flared up between German women and soldiers, forcing commanders to write confused reports to the top about requests to marry. And here's a story that was published in Switzerland after the war. It was written by a woman who lived in Berlin. I was placed in a room in a house. The bomb shelter was packed to the brim. I think I gave Anna something to drink. My Russian seemed surprised that I wasn't breastfeeding her and drew a lush shape in the air, looking askew at my rather skinny breasts. He walked over to Anna's crib. I watched him with some trepidation, but he gently ran his large palm around the baby's head without touching her. Then he gave me several thick slices of bread, cut with a penknife, and a huge piece of smoked pork. Offered me some schnapps. It was going well. He approached Anna's crib again, and this time his movements were a little more clumsy. He kissed her face. I stood next to him, and he put his arm around my shoulders in a friendly way and kissed me, as if casually. Not because I meant anything, but because I was Anna's mother. He smelled strongly of man's sweat, tobacco, fresh air. It was beautiful. Anna looked at us with her big eyes.